The idea of the box here is not just a means of taking and drawing figures. It's also a tool we use to analyze pictures. For instance, if I take now and construct these figures as boxes, in other words, really analyzing to see how the figures are going spatially. We can see the figures leaning in. We see the next figure now is leaning in. This one's at a diagonal in here going back. We find this guy is leaning in. More that way, excuse me. So all of this, the clarifying the form spatially helps us to recognize actually the composition and how it works. So as we look at this then as a total, unfortunately I've got it cropped at the top there. But the composition is all of these guys, everything is going down. He shoved right down the corners, using up all the space. Then we've got the intestine being reeled up. Then you've got this guy looking down. You guys are all looking down, looking down, looking down. And here then we get the guy pointing in the opposite direction. And what he's pointing at is the statue of a Roman god up here. So you're really getting the tension, playing to the opposites in a thing. So it's a really fantastic bit of designing spatially. Even spatially, if we look at the design of it a little bit more, you can see that you've got him on a box here, grill, and that what we're doing is we're going in to the picture, and then as you're going in, then the space in the back of the picture is going in the opposite direction, going back. And the space of the picture is at exact opposite the closest thing. And as you're going up to the top up here, he's dropping stuff down here. So it's a great play of opposites in the whole thing. Now, okay, this is one of my drawings. So this is basically now what we're going to do. We're going to take and analyze the figure as a box form. And in the process of doing this, what we do is the important part is not to try to make the boxes emulate exactly the shape of the figure that we're talking about, but to take and clarify what the figure is doing in space. And so that becomes part of the whole thing. Now, let's show you some examples here now. Okay, here, this is what I want you to do. What we've been doing is, first week we were focusing on the gesture. So up in the corner up here we have, so this is number 1. Get the gesture. 2, now we do these right on top of each other. 2 is simple volumes, spherical forms. Huh?
Don't do them on top and do them.
Right on top of each other. Okay. Then 3, we take and we do the box on top of that. And so, and then finally you can come in and actually, if you wish, take and deal with tone. Now this was drawn on the computer, so I just separated the levels to show. Oh, that's really now the steps that we're going to go through. This can be really quite challenging. Okay. Now, as we go through this, again, these are an example. In the lower left, you've got the gesture, then you've got the simple volumes, and then you've got the box form. Now, you find that the logic process that we're dealing with here can be incredibly useful when it comes to taking and doing painting. So, as we develop the figures then. Now, until we have a model here, what I want you to do is to take and do some drawing from imagination, and which is what this class is supposed to be part of. Okay? And this is really correct. Now, there's a different approach a little bit. Maybe I can do this on the paper up here, and we can take and now. When you're getting a gesture, particularly when you're drawing from imagination now, you may have a very vague idea of what it is that you want. A lot of times in a class situation, I take and suggest that you think of some kind of storyline, something that you are, in a sense, really dealing with. But as you start out, now I'm talking about doing the gesture. Think of doing the gesture as you're trying to, in the beginning, you're taking and getting an impression. You're trying to, just sort of an impression of what you want. And this is a lot easier, in a sense, than trying to be too tight and trying to be too specific in the beginning. The minute you try to take and zero in too fast, it gets stiff. It gets fixated. So in the starting out then is this part of the gesture. You just sort of say, well, okay, now you're trying to think, well, okay, I'm just thinking now, what is what's the figure doing? Well, I'm going to take the figure, and maybe he's taking and going to be leaning over, handing something to somebody else. Okay, he's sitting on a bench or a chair. So in doing this, then I say, well, okay, if he's doing that, maybe head's going to be maybe leaning over, and maybe he's turning a bit here, and maybe he's handing something to somebody over here, and we could even have the other person in here. Maybe there are two people sitting here on a park bench. My first thing was to say, well, have them handing him a book, but maybe a little bit of Jack Daniels. Okay? So what you're getting then is you're saying, well, okay, you're trying to get a visual impression of what is doing. And so you're saying, well, okay, the arm is coming across, and I'll draw them nude, so maybe they're in a sauna and they're taking and handing a beer. Okay? I'm a Finn, we have saunas. Okay? So what we deal with, so this is the first part here. Okay? So you don't, the more I play around with this at this stage, the more I start to get sort of an impression of what I'm trying to take and achieve here. I didn't know what I was going to do when I started. Okay? So it just, well, okay, but this is everything we've been talking about so far now. I'm trying to feel the way the figure goes through, feeling it, coming through, going back. Maybe this guy's other arm is actually going back in here. Okay. Now, the next step in the process then is this taking and dealing, breaking it down another level, dealing with simple volumes. So I'm doing this. Maybe if he's handing something, maybe they're talking, so maybe this guy's going to actually be head turning up a little bit. And so now I'm indicating, going through, start to visualize the whole torso as this part is a simple volume going through. So there's nothing, again, and this is the point I keep trying to make about this, that there's nothing complicated about it. These are really very simple, very, very, very simple steps. So you're taking and saying, well, okay, now going over the form, coming through. Now, maybe turning that leg in a bit more that way. And maybe this could be coming fairly down. Okay, this leg maybe going that way, but I'm going to turn the leg sort of going maybe underneath here a little bit. Okay, shoulder coming across, neck going in. I move the ear over to take and make it so we get a sense of which way it's turning. Okay. Now we start thinking of the shoulder coming over, coming across, the arm going in. I'm just dealing with this thing going in, going through. And you see maybe that beer can or something here. Okay. The other arm, well, maybe start feeling this going back out here, going back in. So, okay, at that point now, and the other figure then is taking in, coming through. And maybe they're sitting on the same bench, so we have to be sensible about where this thing is. I could take and make that leg bend this way also, and maybe take the other one, even going underneath a little bit. So I'm just sort of thinking about how this is working. Maybe they're not in a sauna. Maybe he's handing her, maybe it's a female, and he's got some roses that he's giving to her. But you can see, what the whole thing is just, it's an amorphic type of searching in a way, and this is the way you actually work a lot. It's you starting out with an idea, sort of, and you start building the thing. So now the next point here then is to take and start to clarify this thing spatially. So what I would do now is to take and come in, and now this is the same process I want you to go through in doing the drawing now. Go through, starting out, through. Now, as I look at this, I say, well, I've got this figure leaning out this way. Now, if I take and now to clarify this, see, it's sort of ambiguous, but the minute I start to take and define this as a box form, there's nothing ambiguous about this anymore. And I could even throw in make a bit of a twisting. So I'm thinking of the rib cage coming through. Now that's clear. You know where it's going. Now, at the same time, now I can take and dealing with the pelvis, we would have to take now and start to visualize how that pelvis is taking and going spatially. Maybe going fairly strong back that way. Okay. The head, ignore the neck, but I can say, well, maybe it's coming out a little bit, going through. So here you're taking and visualizing these forms in space now. Coming through. So now, getting fairly clear. Now, as we come through, let's take the legs. Now, there are certain points on the body that we take and we look for to help us try to understand what's going on. You think of the pit of the neck, the bottom of the sternum, corners of the rib cage, corners of the pelvis. Okay? And when you start dealing with the legs, we use across the condyles of the legs. So we go, this really becomes a corner. So we come through, you can see this form going through. And We start to visualize how this form is working in space. I had one of my students was an apprentice to a sculptor here in town who was giving a demonstration at the Getty Museum. And she was showing him what I'm teaching in class. So in the sculpture that he was going through at the Getty, he would take into doing the wire thing, feeling the gesture and putting the gloves. So he actually sculpted the first step as box forms based on what I had been doing. So now, come through, you can see now, this starting to take on a fairly substantial sense of where things are in space. Legs, feet, we just, at this point, we just treat these as a simple wedge form. Okay, now, as I was talking about this one here, I was thinking, well, it's going in, but maybe it's turned this way. So I have to start and figure out, okay, now, where are we going? So this is going back, but if it's turned, then we have to start visualizing and being actually thinking of where we would be seeing the bottom of this. Now, you can see the minute I start to do that, again, there's no question about what the leg is doing. And then as I start to work with this, then I can take and say, well, okay, if that's what's going on there, and I start logically trying to think of how these parts take and relate with the lower leg, then would be taking and be pulling through and building up and going the same way. Now, the whole arm thing, now, for our purposes right now, we're not trying to construct too much of how things fit. And in fact, if you were doing something in a computer, the software would do the fitting, okay, connecting it all together. But we would take and be looking at, okay, what's the overall? And the thing you look for are the condyles. You can see that when your arm is straight, these 3 points line up. The minute you take and bend your arm, you have a triangle. So we go from here to here. So, but the minute you start to turn your arm, you're taking and working with these 3 points then. So what I come do is I look at it this way, I say, well, okay, maybe the condyles are going this way, I think at the end of the ulna here. So this takes and now starts to take and define my box. Okay. And as we go through, if you look at your wrist, you find that your wrist is rather squarish. It's flat across the top, got very clear-cut corners to it, things going down. You've got a very, very clear sense of volume. So again, you take and come in and you look for that point. And they're coming through. And hands, we saw the Holbein hands, just the boxes series. And almost any book that you find on how to draw hands uses boxes, even mine. Okay, now, so we start to see, I'm not going to go through too much here now with that, but now, so we've got this figure sitting fairly clear in space. So I could take and add this other arm, although that's sort of secondary. I'm thinking of the condyles going across, coming through. So there's no ambiguity now about where any of this figure is spatially. But the other figure, now that's still a problem now. So as I come through, let's take and just start with the head. Well, when you're dealing with the head, when a person is perfectly straight facing you, the line of the brow to the ears is a straight line. But the minute you take and look up, this no longer correlates. We have the line from here to the ear going up. This is going across the ears. In flat view are taking and lining up at the top of the ear, The bottom of the ear lines up with the bottom of your nose. So this corner, the corner of the eye socket becomes in the line of the brow, and from there to the top of the ear. In fact, if you look at one of Bridgman's books on how to draw, that's the first line that he draws. That's where the drawing begins. So here, looking at this, I've got roughed the idea of the head looking down. So if I take this corner of the brow, and I'm going to the ear, and the general sense, I'm thinking the top of the head is here. Well, now this gives me a pretty good fix on what the head is doing. So I can fairly clearly take and establish what's going on. Because now you can see very, very clear how those two parts relate. Okay, same thing now with start dealing with the torso. Why I haven't gone through drawing the volume very much on that torso. I want to sort of get a little bit of head start here and think, okay, where is this going? Where do we feel the pelvis behind or the waist? And we can start thinking about where the legs are coming out, breaking it down a little bit. So I can take now and I can say, well, okay, let's draw this box here. So now we're getting a pretty strong sense of how those two figures are working with each other. And they come through, try to think, well, where is it seated on the ground? Okay, start to visualize, draw through the figures, trying to think, okay, where is this, that, it's over here. Now, if that's going on that way, I have to actually be conscious now. I started out with the idea that they're on a bench. Well, maybe I would have to revise this because I'm not sure that I've got them looking like they're sitting on the same bench. You have to start, maybe I'd have to back up on that and trying to figure out where it's at. But let's just take at this point anyway and just stick with this. I'm coming out the knee. I want the knee turning. So I'm going back in. So now, as we're doing this now, we can see the whole thing is taking and building up. And we could take and carry each element of this thing. They would take and say, with another hand coming up, maybe there's a gal, and these are flowers here, and she's taking the flowers. And we got the arm going back. So, in approaching this thing, is that, and that the idea is now that this is a tool. That nobody likes really to look at boxes unless you're drawing robots. But it's a tool. I worked on a show a few years ago called PageMaster. I don't know if anybody ever seen it. And it was a boy falls asleep in a library, and all the books in the library come alive. And so, you were drawing books. Books are boxes. Bookcases, rectangle boxes. It saved my life. I mean, if you start thinking about, okay, how's this guy going to crawl out of, and you're doing all these down shots, he's crawling out of the belly of a dragon. Okay, going up. And he's getting up, and he's crawling up these book stacks and going through. That's where it was done. And as the stuff I was showing on the computer, it's the way it's constructed. You use these are tools to take and deal with it. So as you develop your thing, now the other part that we could add to this to make it a little more clear is that you come in and, like I started doing here, taking and adding tone to the drawing. Adding tone, not necessarily to focus on a light source, but just to take and clarify what these shapes are doing in space. So you could take and, for instance, here I could, even though this is the end here, maybe I could take and drop the end of that in tone. I could put a tone on the side here, coming through. We could take and here now I'm clarifying, pushing the line a little bit. I could be using a tone. So using the box as a means of, it will also take, and just exactly what it did here, it took and brought into question about where the two figures are they sitting on the same surface. And you don't really know right to start when you start and you're doing your drawing. Oh yeah, this is sort of the guy here, but you can't do that. I remember a guy who was actually pretty well known here in town. He was a student at the time at Art Center, and he was taking a special class for a few students, and the instructor gave him the problem. Gave the whole class the problem of taking and drawing two people sitting at a table playing chess. This guy could not draw the figure sitting at the table in the chair behind the thing. And he even ended up quit and did something else. But that's the type of a serious thing, and particularly if you're working in the animation industry or any kind of three-dimensional, if you're working, say, doing in film, you have to have a very clear sense of where things are in space. You have to nail it down. You have to have ground planes. You have to have very clear. So this is a tool. You use it when you need it. Most of the time, I use it, but not like this. It's ingrained now in my psyche. I see corners, and so I'm always using the corners as a way of taking and getting going with the thing. So. Okay, so now I think our model should be here.
Yes.
Okay, so we might as well start with the model, and he's really good now. I saw him out there. Yeah.
Should I tell them to?
Yeah, tell him to come in. So, what I want you to do now, he has an actually sort of appears a distorted rib cage. You'll see. I don't want to talk about it when he's here, but it's got an odd shape. So, but you'll be able to see corners, and I'll be able to put outside.